There was once a city at the heart of the world, where the rivers Tigris and Euphrates embraced like twin veins of life. A city that shimmered with wisdom, trade, and faith. Its name was Baghdad. Here, merchants greeted the dawn with songs and spices. The air carried the scent of cinnamon, parchment, and distant seas. In the markets, gold glimmered beside ink pots, and the rhythm of footsteps mixed with quiet laughter and prayer. Above it all, minarets rose like poems carved into the sky. By day, their shadows stretched across courtyards of marble and mosaic. By night, lamps flickered beside open books, where scholars translated the stars into words. Baghdad was more than a city. It was an idea, a place where the pursuit of beauty was a form of worship, and knowledge itself was a light that never dimmed. So tonight, let us return to that golden city, to walk its streets beneath the soft glow of lanterns, to listen to its music of water and wind, and to remember the world as it once was, quiet, brilliant, and full of wonder. Before the sun rises, Baghdad is quiet. The river lies still, mirroring a pale moon that fades with each passing moment. A faint wind moves over the Tigris, carrying the smell of clay, ink, and the last flicker of night's coolness. Somewhere a rooster calls, and then, faintly, a muezzin's voice threads through the silence, soft and wavering, echoing from minarets whose domes catch the first shy light of dawn. This is Baghdad, around the 9th century, the heart of a world that believed knowledge itself was divine. Here, learning was not confined to temples or kings. It lived in the streets, in the homes, in the hum of life before the city stirred awake. Before its great libraries opened their doors, Baghdad was already a living library. As dawn creeps over the horizon, the city exhales. The narrow alleys of Kark begin to stir with footsteps, gentle, unhurried. Doors open with a low creak, and 1,000 small lives begin to unfold. Women sweep courtyards washed with last night's moonlight. A boy carries bread from the communal oven, its crust warm against the chill air. In a corner shop, a spice merchant arranges small clay bowls filled with saffron, turmeric, and dried rose petals, each color brighter than the one beside it. The scent of cardamom and freshly ground coffee drifts down the lane. And beneath that, the faint smell of parchment and oil from a calligrapher already at his desk, tracing the morning's first line in perfect silence. Life here begins with care. Each act, no matter how small, carries an echo of devotion to beauty, to order, to meaning. Inside homes built around open courtyards, morning light spills across tiles glazed in turquoise and cream. Families gather on woven mats. The air hums softly with prayer. A father pours water from a brass ewer into a basin, washing his hands before breakfast. The water glitters like glass, and the sound of it, the simple rhythm, is almost sacred. Breakfast is modest but full of grace. Flatbread, dates, soft cheese, honey, and sometimes a cup of warm milk. Children eat quietly, listening to stories of ancestors or verses from poets long gone. In this city, stories are sustenance. A scholar's daughter might be learning her letters by tracing them in sand. A young boy, his head still heavy with sleep, memorizes lines from the Quran. Outside, a palm tree leans gently into the morning wind. The Tigris divides Baghdad like a thread of living silver. Boats drift slowly across its surface. Ferrymen calling out in low voices, their words carried by the river's calm. The water has seen it all. The scholars, the poets, the merchants, the dreamers. It carries the memory of centuries. Along its banks, men draw buckets of water for the day's use. Fishermen repair their nets, humming lines of old verses. The city's pulse flows with the river. The rhythm of water mirrors the rhythm of prayer. Sometimes, when the wind is just right, one can hear laughter from the gardens across the water. Small bursts of joy echoing like chimes between walls of stucco and marble. By mid-morning, the papermakers have already begun their work. Sheets of linen pulp dry on racks under the sun, thin as silk and pale as ivory. The scent of wet fiber mixes with smoke from nearby stoves. This paper, warak, is one of Baghdad's quiet revolutions. Once, knowledge was carved, inscribed, or laboriously copied on parchment. But now, words flow more freely. The art of making paper, brought from distant China, has transformed this city into the beating heart of the written world. The sound of brushes and pens fills the air, soft scratching, rhythmic, eternal. Scribes lean over their desks, their fingers ink-stained, their movements graceful and deliberate. Each curve of each letter is a prayer of its own. Knowledge here is not hoarded, it's shared, like water from a well that never runs dry. In the district near the Great Mosque, there's a street known simply as Souk al-Warakin, the street of booksellers. Here, knowledge is traded like spice, measured like silk. Every shop is a quiet sanctuary, filled with the smell of ink and cedarwood. Men sit cross-legged among piles of manuscripts, geometry, medicine, astronomy, poetry. The entire world gathered between covers of script. Students come to read, debate, and sometimes to simply breathe the air of learning. There's no rush here. The day moves at the pace of thought. A young student waits patiently as a bookseller copies out a rare text by Al-Kindi. Outside, sunlight filters through lattice screens, painting golden geometry on the floor. If one listens closely, beneath the low murmur of voices, there's a rhythm. The pulse of an age that believes ideas are eternal. A calligrapher sits alone by the window of his workshop. His tools are simple: reed pen, knife, ink pot, and a piece of paper smooth as water. His art is not for vanity. It's an act of remembrance. Each letter he writes holds the echo of revelation, the weight of tradition, and the grace of divine order. His teacher once told him, to write beautifully is to remember the beauty of the world. He breathes slowly, draws the pen across the page, and watches the ink bloom like a shadow made of light. Outside, the world stirs with noise, but here, there is stillness. The lines he writes today may one day rest in a scholar's hands 1,000 miles away. In this way, even ink becomes immortal. By noon, the city slows again. The sun hangs high, and the light turns heavy, spilling gold across every surface. Merchants draw curtains to block the heat. Travelers find shade under palm trees. The hum of life becomes softer, slower, as though the city itself is inhaling before the afternoon begins. Children nap in the cool of courtyards. Cats curl near fountains. The faint splash of water mingles with the sound of distant prayer. Even the wind seems to rest. This midday stillness, This shimmering pause is one of the city's quiet miracles. In it, people remember that all knowledge, all striving, begins and ends in silence. When the sun begins to tilt west, Baghdad reawakens. The markets come alive again, not with noise, but with rhythm. Weavers display carpets dyed in indigo and red. Metalworkers hammer brass into bowls that gleam like liquid gold. The air smells of roasted chickpeas, figs, and mint. In the crowd, a poet might be reciting lines to a small circle of listeners. His words drift between the stalls, light as dust. A child laughs. A merchant bargains with quiet patience. A woman chooses spices with the practiced grace of someone who understands their weight, their scent, their soul. This, too, is knowledge. The kind that lives not in books, but in hands and hearts. As the sun descends, the domes and minarets of Baghdad glow like bronze. The Tigris catches fire with reflected light, orange, then pink, then deep violet. From a rooftop, one can see smoke rising from countless hearths. Lanterns flicker to life across the city, one by one, like stars being born. Somewhere, the sound of an oud drifts through the warm air, slow and melancholic. It's in this hour, between day and night, that the city feels most alive, most eternal. Because Baghdad, in its golden age, was not just a place. It was an idea that truth and beauty were worth building a world upon. The last call to prayer echoes through the streets, and as it fades, the city returns to quiet once more. A single scholar lights his lamp and opens his book, his face bathed in amber glow. Night deepens, and knowledge continues its silent vigil. The first day in Baghdad ends as gently as it began. No great battles, no royal decrees, only the slow rhythm of living, learning, and remembering. Each house, each street, each courtyard holds a small piece of something eternal. The belief that wisdom, like light, multiplies when shared. As the moon rises, the city sleeps beneath 1,000 lamps, and in the quiet hum of the night, the world itself seems to listen, to the soft sound of pages turning somewhere far away. Morning light seeps over Baghdad's domes, spilling into the courtyard of a vast building that hums with quiet purpose. The Bait al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom, is not a palace, not a temple. It is something rarer, a sanctuary built for thought. Marble columns rise toward open arches. Within them, a mosaic of silence and sound, the shuffle of sandals, the whisper of parchment, the steady rhythm of ink. There is no hierarchy here of wealth or blood. Scholars from Persia, Syria, Byzantium, and India move side by side, their robes brushing in quiet respect. Some carry scrolls in Greek, others in Sanskrit or Syriac, soon to be rendered into Arabic, the language of the world's new curiosity. Inside these walls, human thought becomes a kind of prayer. In one chamber, the translators are at work. Their desks form a circle around a central pool, where water reflects the light of hanging lamps. On each table lies a different script: Greek beside Arabic, Persian beside Syriac, fragments of worlds being carefully bridged. A translator murmurs aloud in Greek, Aristoteles, Perisukes. Another repeats it softly in Arabic, Aristoteles, fi al-nafs. Between them, Meaning flows like the water beside them, endlessly shifting, endlessly renewed. The translation is not mechanical. It's intimate, almost an act of devotion. To carry one thought from one tongue to another is to carry light across darkness. Some work on mathematics, others on medicine or philosophy. They pause to debate, smile, correct, begin again. Their voices never rise, only blend into the hum of thought that fills the air like music. Above, on the terrace that overlooks the Tigris, the astronomers begin their work. They set brass astrolabes upon carved stone tables, their circular forms gleaming beneath the sky. Theirs is a patient study, the reading of stars and shadows, time and silence. They chart the movements of Saturn, the dance of Venus, the rise of constellations over the desert. Somewhere below, the call to prayer sounds, aligning heaven and earth in one rhythm. One scholar, Al-Farghani, adjusts a sighting rod, murmuring his calculations. Another sketches the arc of the moon's path upon parchment. They are not searching for magic, only for order. To understand creation is to them to honor its creator. The wind moves gently over the terrace, lifting the corners of their robes. A bird circles overhead. Even the sky seems to lean closer, listening. Inside, another group of minds turns from stars to numbers. Geometry is their language, precision their devotion. They draw circles upon parchment, compasses gliding with reverent care. The patterns they create are not only for science, but for beauty. The same geometry that shapes the tiles of mosques and the courtyards of gardens. In the House of Wisdom, mathematics is not cold. It breathes. A line becomes a prayer. A circle becomes the echo of infinity. When Al-Khwarizmi teaches, his students listen as though to a poet. He speaks not of numbers, but of harmony, how every problem holds within it a kind of music. Later, centuries will name algorithm after him, but here, now, he is only a man lost in thought, his fingers dusted with chalk. In a great hall beyond the courtyard lies the heart of the House of Wisdom, its library. Shelves upon shelves of manuscripts line the walls, each bound in leather or silk. The air smells of cedar and ink, a perfume of knowledge. Students move quietly through the aisles, their fingers grazing spines like pilgrims at a shrine. A librarian records each work in careful script: astronomy, medicine, logic, poetry, the world condensed into words. When a new book arrives, there is a ritual of reverence. It is unwrapped from cloth as though it were a newborn child, its contents read aloud to mark its entry into the realm of shared memory. And then it joins the others, a single flame added to a sea of light. At midday, the scholars step outside to rest their eyes and minds. Behind the library lies a small garden, a walled paradise of jasmine, myrtle, and orange trees. A fountain murmurs at its center, scattering silver drops into the air. They sit in circles beneath the shade, sipping sherbet made from crushed ice and rose water. Conversations drift like clouds, from the movements of planets to the ethics of medicine, from the nature of the soul to the color of light. Each voice adds a note to a single melody, the joy of understanding. Sometimes a poet reads aloud, his words mingling with bird song. The heart is a mirror, he says. Polish it with thought, and it reflects the stars. The others nod, smiling. Even rest here is a continuation of study, soft, thoughtful, endless. Beyond the main hall, in a quieter wing, artisans work under the watchful eyes of scholars. Here, instruments of thought are born. Astrolabes, sundials, globes, and measuring rods. The metal workers hammer in rhythm, shaping brass into circles so perfect they seem divine. Each instrument is not merely a tool, but a piece of art, engraved with verses and the names of stars. A young apprentice polishes the surface of a celestial globe until it mirrors his face. He studies the reflection, small, distorted, yet surrounded by the cosmos. Perhaps, he thinks, this is what knowledge feels like, to glimpse oneself inside something vast and bright. As the sun lowers, the scholars gather in the main hall for discourse. There is no podium, no rank. Each may speak, question, or counter. Today's topic, the nature of light. Is it a stream of particles or a wave of illumination from the divine? The discussion unfolds gently. No raised voices, no arrogance, only curiosity. One man quotes from a Greek manuscript, another from the Quran, another from his own observation. Their voices rise and fall like waves, reason and reverence woven as one. And as the last light of day filters through stained glass, coloring the floor with hues of blue and amber, it seems that the light itself has joined the conversation. When night comes, the terrace once more fills with quiet figures looking up. The lamps below flicker, but the stars above burn steady and cold. One scholar traces the motion of Jupiter with his finger against the sky. Another compares notes by candlelight. The air is still. The city sleeps. Only here, in the House of Wisdom, does thought continue to hum like a hidden current. They measure time not in hours, but in shadows, not in ambition, but in wonder. For them, each star is not a mystery to be conquered, but a verse to be read. The night deepens. Candles burn low. A scholar closes his book, rubs the ink from his fingers, and steps into the courtyard. He looks up at the stars, the same ones studied by the ancients, the same that will outlive him. He smiles softly. The House of Wisdom is more than walls or words. It is a promise that the light of the mind, once kindled, will never truly fade. Centuries later, the river will still flow, the domes will still glimmer at sunset, and the dust will still whisper with memory. For knowledge, once born, does not die. It waits, patiently, eternally, for someone to look up again. Before the streets awaken, a single home glows with the warmth of dawn. A courtyard lies open to the sky, where light falls softly upon turquoise tiles, and the sound of water hums from a small fountain. The air is cool and scented faintly with jasmine. A woman sweeps the marble floor with deliberate grace. Her movement is silent, her rhythm unhurried. Nearby, a man unfolds a woven rug and turns eastward, his shadow bending with the first call to prayer. Inside these walls lies the heart of civilization, not in palaces or libraries, but in homes like these, where beauty, discipline, and reflection weave through daily life like threads of gold. The architecture of daily life was designed to reflect harmony between inner peace and outer form. A typical home in Baghdad or Cordoba opened inward. High walls faced the street, plain and undecorated, guarding privacy and silence. But within those walls, a world unfolded open courtyards filled with sunlight, potted herbs, water channels, and birdsong. Each home was a microcosm of paradise. The Quran described gardens beneath which rivers flow, and the architects of the Golden Age sought to bring that image to life. Arches, lattices, and domes were not decoration. They were geometry made sacred, guiding the eye towards symmetry and order. Rooms were arranged around the courtyard. The public spaces welcomed guests. The private ones offered retreat. Doors remained low to encourage humility when entering. Even sound was part of the design. Water to mask noise, clay and plaster to soften voices, wooden screens to let light pass gently through. This was not luxury for its own sake. It was a form of worship, a spatial poetry of moderation and beauty. Throughout the day, light moved slowly across the home, transforming it hour by hour. In the morning, it entered through the courtyard, painting long rectangles across the tiled floors. By midday, the air shimmered in stillness, and the rooms turned cool, protected by thick walls and shaded porticos. At sunset, the walls glowed with reflected amber light, and lanterns were lit, one by one, each flame mirrored in brass and copper. Light was more than illumination. It was the measure of time itself, a reminder of creation's rhythm. Shadow, too, had meaning. It softened what was bright, taught the eye to rest. Islamic art and architecture found beauty not in what dazzled, but in what calmed. Every beam of sunlight, every flicker of shadow across carved plaster was part of a language, quiet, unspoken, but deeply human. The day unfolded not by clocks, but by prayer. At dawn, Fajr. At noon, Dhuhr. At afternoon, Asr. At sunset, Maghrib. At night, Isha. Between these moments, life found its rhythm. Work began after the first prayer, paused under the heat of noon, and softened again as evening descended. Time was not an enemy, but a companion, gently reminding one of the balance between labor and contemplation. Before each prayer, a ritual of cleansing, washing hands, mouth, face, and feet. The water was cool and refreshing, carrying away the dust of the day and resetting the spirit. Even this act, humble and simple, was imbued with meaning. Cleanliness was not vanity. It was preparation for presence, a gesture of respect before the divine. When it came to food, the people of the Golden Age treated the meal as both nourishment and gratitude. Tables were low, and meals shared while seated on woven mats. The food itself reflected geography and philosophy, simple, balanced, and abundant in color. Bread, warm from the clay oven, was the heart of every meal. Dates, olives, figs, and pomegranates offered sweetness and variety. Lentil soups simmered with cumin and coriander. Fragrant rice, often infused with saffron or rosewater, filled the air with soft perfume. The etiquette was gentle and mindful. The right hand was used for eating, the left for serving others. Water was poured quietly from brass jugs. Conversation moved slowly. Hospitality was sacred. Even the poorest homes kept something to offer a guest, a few dates, a cup of milk, or simply a place to rest in the shade. To share a meal was to share peace. The kitchen was small, often hidden behind arches near the courtyard. A clay hearth burned low throughout the day. Copper pots hung from wooden beams, their surfaces darkened by years of use. Spices were kept in small ceramic jars: cinnamon, saffron, black pepper from India, and dried mint from the gardens beyond the walls. The air itself carried the story of trade, for every flavor spoke of journeys, caravans across deserts, ships from Yemen, markets in Damascus or Samarkand. Cooking was a slow art, bread baked against the inner wall of a tandoor oven. Stews simmered until their fragrance filled the air. Tea was brewed gently, poured high to cool, and served with small gestures of ceremony. Even the act of preparing food was done with intention, quiet, patient, precise. In this rhythm, time seemed to dissolve. The people of the Golden Age dressed with elegance, but without excess. Clothing was a reflection of humility, refinement, and environment. Loose robes of linen and cotton allowed the body to breathe. Fine silks, imported from the East, were worn on special occasions. Colors carried meaning: white for purity, green for faith, blue for wisdom. Garments were often perfumed lightly with musk or sandalwood, their fragrance lingering like a quiet signature. For men, turbans and light cloaks shielded from the sun. For women, veils and flowing fabrics offered both dignity and grace. Ornamentation existed, but restraint was honored. Beauty found in form and proportion, not display. In a world that sought harmony, even clothing was part of philosophy. Moderation, balance, and refinement in all things. Every home had its own music: the pluck of an oud in the afternoon, the soft recitation of poetry after dinner, the distant echo of prayer drifting from minarets. Sound was never sharp. It moved through space like water, reflecting the calm of the household. Scent, too, was essential. Musk, amber, rosewater, and oud wood burned in small clay censers. A home's fragrance was its memory, a mixture of spice, ink, and life itself. Even silence carried depth here. It was not emptiness, but fullness, a space for thought, for gratitude, for being. After the evening meal, families gathered under the open sky. The air cooled, and the stars emerged, bright and endless over Baghdad. Some listened to storytellers in the courtyard, reciting ancient tales of Persia and Arabia. Others read quietly, or copied verses from poets like al-Mutanabbi and Rumi. Conversation was gentle, never hurried. Wisdom was not displayed but shared, like tea poured evenly among friends. Children dozed near the fountain as their parents whispered beneath the lanterns. The city outside hummed softly, but within the walls, time seemed suspended, a world preserved in light and stillness. Before sleep came another act of ritual, the cleansing of the day. Hands and faces were washed once more, garments folded neatly, lamps trimmed so the flame would not smoke. Beds were simple: a thin mattress, a woven blanket, sometimes a pillow filled with cotton or wool. Before lying down, many whispered a brief prayer of thanks. Gratitude was not an event, it was a rhythm, a constant remembering of the divine presence in the ordinary. The night in Baghdad was rarely silent. From afar, one might hear the faint sound of the Tigris, the call of night birds, the creak of a distant gate. But within the home, there was peace, a peace woven from routine, care, and devotion. To live in the Golden Age was to understand that the sacred and the ordinary were never far apart. A meal shared, a room kept clean, a prayer whispered at dawn. Each was a form of worship. The people of this age did not separate beauty from utility, nor thought from action. They believed that a well-ordered home reflected a well-ordered soul, that the care given to a courtyard or a cup of tea was a reflection of the care owed to life itself. Their art of living was not grandeur, it was balance, a dance between simplicity and richness, silence and speech, work and rest. And in that balance lay their serenity, a serenity that echoed centuries later through their architecture, their literature, and their wisdom. When historians write of the Golden Age, they often recall its scholars, inventions, and discoveries. But perhaps its greatest achievement was quieter, the art of living itself. For what is civilization, if not the sum of its daily gestures? The way one greets the morning, the way one treats a guest, the way one leaves a lamp burning against the darkness. In the stillness of those homes, under the flicker of lanterns and the whisper of prayer, something enduring was built. A life not of conquest, but of harmony. A peace not of silence, but of understanding. A beauty born not of opulence, but of care. And though the centuries have passed, the echo remains. In every act of thoughtfulness, every shared meal, every quiet moment beneath the stars. The city stirs before sunrise. Somewhere behind the high mud brick walls of Baghdad, a soft clang of metal echoes. Wooden shutters creak open, and merchants sweep dust from their thresholds. The air smells faintly of date syrup, cardamom, and morning bread. As the sky turns pale gold, the bazaar awakens, not suddenly, but like the slow rising of a tide. The voices begin low and patient. Greetings, murmurs, the familiar rhythm of barter that will last until nightfall. The marketplace was not merely a place to trade goods. It was the heart of civilization itself, the meeting point of worlds. Here, knowledge moved with spices, wisdom traveled with fabrics. The pulse of the Islamic Golden Age beat loudest in its markets, where merchants, poets, and artisans lived side by side, bound by the simple exchange of trust. From above, the marketplace was like a woven carpet, its paths a network of color and motion. Every craft had its own quarter, the weavers near the river, the metal workers close to the gates, the spice sellers beneath the arcades where the air stayed cool. The architecture was practical yet poetic. Vaulted ceilings caught the sound of footsteps and turned them to echoes. Arched passageways filtered light into thin ribbons. At midday, when the heat grew heavy, cloth awnings were drawn across the alleys, casting soft, diffused shadows. It was a living organism, breathing, changing, adapting with every season. Each stall, no larger than a room, carried its owner's world. Scales polished smooth by decades of weighing. Jars of colored glass, a prayer mat rolled neatly beneath the counter. Commerce here was not noise and haste, it was ritual, slow, deliberate, and built on trust more than coin. If one closed their eyes, the bazaar could still be felt, through scent alone. The spice quarter was a universe of its own. Cinnamon and cloves from India, saffron from Persia, dried roses from Syria, and incense from Yemen filled the air like unseen poetry. Every merchant knew his trade by smell. A skilled nose could tell the difference between pepper from Sumatra and pepper from Zanzibar. In the cool shade of the spice stalls, scales tipped gently, powders spilled in slow motion. buyers leaned in to breathe deeply before agreeing on a price. To trade spices was to trade in memory, each fragrance carrying the trace of another land, another people, and, above it all, the soft murmur of recited verses, blessings whispered before every exchange, a reminder that wealth without honesty was only dust. In the marketplaces of the Golden Age, language was as valuable as gold. Arabic was the tongue of contracts, poetry, and science. But the bazaar spoke many dialects. Persian merchants bargained with Berbers from North Africa. Greek traders discussed silk prices with Syrians. Turkish caravan leaders shouted across the crowd, and Indian sailors gestured with laughter and open palms. It was a world knitted together by conversation, by words measured carefully, spoken with patience. There were no banks as we know them today, yet credit and trust traveled vast distances. Letters of exchange, suftajas, were written in flowing calligraphy, promising payment in distant cities. A merchant in Baghdad might buy goods from Cairo with nothing but a written word sealed in wax. Commerce was not a contest, but an art, one that valued integrity as much as skill. A handshake, a cup of tea, and a verse of the Quran often closed a deal more firmly than any signature. Around midday, the rhythm of the market deepened. From the western gate came the sound of bells, faint at first, then clearer. The arrival of the caravan. Dust rose over the horizon as camels entered the city in long, slow lines. Each bore a story written in goods. Silk from China, ivory from Africa, lapis from Afghanistan, dates from Basra, and wool from Yemen. Children gathered to watch, their faces glowing with wonder. For the city, every caravan meant new colors, new flavors, new tales from the edge of the world. At the caravanserai, vast courtyard inns designed for traders, goods were unloaded, contracts renewed, prayers shared, and rest finally taken. Within these walls, strangers became guests, and guests became friends. Not all wealth in the bazaar came from distant lands. Much of it was crafted by hands that never left the city. In the artisans' quarter, the air shimmered with the hum of creation, the clang of hammer on metal, the rhythm of the loom, the hiss of dye meeting water. Metal workers shaped copper into lamps and basins so perfectly balanced that they sang when struck. Weavers at their looms created fabrics that rippled like water. Potters turned clay into vessels painted with verses of poetry, simple objects made eternal by beauty. Each artisan was both craftsman and philosopher. To create was a form of prayer, a dialogue between patience and perfection. No piece was rushed. A single bowl could take days, a carpet months, a calligraphed page an entire season. And yet in that slowness there was peace, a kind of meditation that turned labor into worship. Among the most respected crafts was the art of weaving. To watch a master weaver was to witness a story unfold in silence. Thread by thread, pattern by pattern, meaning took form. The colors held memory, indigo for night, gold for faith, red for endurance. Each carpet was a map of thought, each stitch a prayer for balance. It was said that the best weavers intentionally left a small flaw in their work, a reminder that perfection belonged only to God. In the hum of the loom, time disappeared. The rhythm became heartbeat, the cloth a mirror of patience. When finished, the carpet was not merely a possession, it was a home for the soul. In a quiet corner of the market, away from the noise of trade, sat the calligrapher. Before him lay an array of reed pens, each cut to a different thickness. A bowl of ink rested beside a lamp, its flame steady. He wrote not for profit, but for meaning. Verses of the Quran, poems, letters, or shop signs, all flowed from the same disciplined hand. To him, each stroke was alive. The curve of a letter was a universe. In the symmetry of Arabic script, he found divine order, an art where word and spirit became one. Travelers often paused just to watch. Some commissioned small works to carry home. Others only listened to the scratch of pen on paper, the quiet rhythm of devotion. The market spoke in rhythm, the ebb and flow of human exchange. A fruit seller weighed dates with a copper balance. A jeweler held a gemstone to the light. A boy recited poetry to attract buyers. Laughter mingled with argument, but it was never hostile. Barter was a dance, guided by courtesy and wit. A merchant who argued too fiercely risked losing respect, for the market valued composure above victory. In this slow economy, time itself seemed different. A sale was not rushed. Tea was poured, questions asked, blessings exchanged. By the time coins changed hands, the deal had already become a friendship. Beyond goods, the market traded something rarer: ideas. Between stalls, scholars and poets gathered. They debated philosophy beside spice jars, discussed astronomy between bolts of silk, and recited verses that turned commerce into art. Knowledge here was alive, not confined to universities or palaces, but walking, breathing, arguing in the open air. A philosopher might pause to buy bread and find himself in discussion with a sailor who had seen the Indian Ocean. A mathematician might share tea with a jeweler who measured gems by the stars. It was said that no one left the bazaar without learning something new, even if it was just a story, a proverb, or a different way of seeing the world. As the sun began to fall, the market softened. Shadows lengthened, lanterns were lit, and the air filled with the faint music of the oud. Merchants closed their shutters slowly, sweeping dust from the day. Children carried home baskets of fruit. The scent of grilled bread drifted through the alleys. The noise faded to a gentle hum, like the city itself exhaling after long labor. In the half-light, the marketplace revealed its truest form. Not just a place of trade, but a living testament to the art of coexistence. For within its walls the world met without conquest, exchanged without pride, and departed with understanding. Centuries have passed, and the great markets of Baghdad and Damascus are mostly gone. Their walls lost to dust, their voices faded, but their spirit endures. In every handmade object, in every act of honest trade, something of that old soul remains. The patience of the weaver, the devotion of the calligrapher, the integrity of the merchant, who would rather lose a sale than lose his word. They understood that civilization was not built by kings, but by craftsmen, those who shaped the world with their hands and their humility. And so, when we hold a piece of pottery, smell a spice, or read an ancient script, we are touching that same invisible thread, the quiet work of millions who built their lives around care, beauty, and sincerity. The true wealth of the Golden Age was never its gold or its silk. It was the harmony between mind and hand, between art and honesty. In the stillness of the bazaar, beneath the hum of barter and the scent of spices, a civilization found its rhythm, patient, luminous, human. And when night fell and the last lanterns dimmed, the market rested, not in silence, but in contentment. For the work of the day had been more than trade. It had been communion, between people, between faiths, between worlds. 1,000 lamps once burned in those markets. Their light may be gone from sight, but their warmth remains, alive in memory, alive in every gesture of creation. At dawn, the city is silent except for one sound: water falling gently from a marble spout into a pool of blue mosaic. A garden wakes beneath the first light, its leaves trembling softly in the morning air. The scent of orange blossoms lingers, mixed with damp earth and jasmine. It is not a royal garden, nor one of grand scale. It belongs to a scholar, quiet, modest, walled from the street by mud brick and cedar. Here, among the trickle of fountains and the rustle of palms, he finds what the world beyond often forgets: stillness. In this age, to create a garden was not to decorate the earth, but to converse with it, to listen to what the soil and the water whispered, and to arrange space so that nature itself could recite a verse. The word Jannah, meaning paradise, comes from the root JNN, to conceal, to enclose. In the hearts of the people of the Golden Age, paradise was not a distant promise, but an ideal made visible through the art of gardens. Every element carried meaning: water, the breath of life; shade, the mercy of rest; light, the sign of the divine. To walk through such a garden was to walk through theology made real. 4 channels of water often divided the space, symbolizing rivers of milk, honey, wine, and clear water. Each path led to a center, often a small pavilion or a pool, the still point of perfection where reflection met reality. It was geometry married to faith, an echo of divine order made tangible on earth. To build such a garden required more than design. It required philosophy. Engineers and poets worked together, guided by the same question: how do you build peace? The engineers spoke in measurements, in the width of channels, the tilt of tiles, the rhythm of irrigation drawn from qanats deep underground. The poets spoke in metaphor, in rivers that whispered to the soul, in blossoms that embodied gratitude. Between them, a language emerged, of proportion, of silence, of time made circular. Gardens were built not to impress, but to heal, each one a balance of opposites: stone and soil, water and flame, shadow and light. Even sound was designed. A fountain might be placed not for view, but for the music it made: water striking bronze, water cooling air. To create was to remember that harmony was the truest form of worship. In the lands of the Caliphate, water was both miracle and measure. To hear it meant life, to see it meant grace. Engineers mastered its movement with astonishing precision. In the gardens of Damascus, channels were lined with polished stone so smooth that the water shimmered like glass. In the courts of Andalusia, Fountains caught sunlight and scattered it like fragments of stars. Yet water was not decoration. It was conversation. It cooled the air, invited birds, nourished trees, and spoke in voices that never repeated. To some, it was a metaphor for knowledge, flowing, refreshing, endless in source. To others, it was remembrance of the prophet's words, "A drop of water is a drop of mercy." As day passed, the fountains reflected the sky's moods, gold at dawn, white at noon, indigo by night. The garden thus became a mirror of the heavens. Each tree was planted with thought: cypress for endurance, date palms for sustenance, orange and pomegranate for joy. The gardeners of the Golden Age were not merely farmers. They were philosophers of shade. They understood how light filtered through leaves, how scent moved with the wind, how silence grew where branches met. In the heat of midday, the air grew still, and yet the garden breathed. The leaves shimmered, and a dove called from the high wall. Somewhere, a scholar turned a page, the faint sound blending with the murmur of water. To sit beneath a tree was to listen to God's quietest lessons: patience, generosity, resilience. For in the rhythm of leaves, one learned how to live. Light was the soul of these gardens. It moved like a living thing, changing color with each hour. In the morning, it was cool and silver, brushing gently across marble. At noon, it became gold and sharp, slicing through the lattices of pavilions. At dusk, it turned soft and rose-colored, clinging to the leaves like memory. The architects of the Golden Age treated light as sacred geometry. Every arch framed a fragment of sky. Every pool held a reflection of clouds. The garden itself was an instrument, tuned to the movement of the sun. Even shadow had its role. It offered contrast, a place for the eye to rest. As in life, beauty lay not in the constant brightness, but in the balance between radiance and repose. Scent and sound shaped the invisible world of the garden. Jasmine, rose, and myrtle grew near walkways, releasing fragrance with each passing breeze. Mint, basil, and lavender bordered the fountains, perfuming the air where people gathered to read or talk. The sounds were soft and cyclical: water trickling, leaves whispering, a nightingale calling from the almond trees. Sometimes a musician would sit in the corner of a pavilion and play the oud, his melody rising and falling like the wind. To those who visited, the garden was a poem written in air, its lines invisible but felt deeply. Every sense was called to stillness, to awareness, to gratitude. For scholars, the garden was more than a retreat. It was a classroom of silence. Under the shade of fig trees, students gathered around their teacher, scrolls open, voices low. Between lessons, they paused to listen to the fountain's rhythm, letting thoughts settle like silt in clear water. Many of the greatest works of the Golden Age were conceived in gardens: treatises on medicine, astronomy, and philosophy. For it was believed that wisdom grows best where nature and thought meet. A leaf, a drop of dew, the curve of a vine, each held a lesson. Each reflected divine order. The scholar would point to a flower and say, "Behold the universe in miniature." To understand it is to understand creation. Not all gardens were private. In great cities like Cordoba, Baghdad, and Isfahan, public gardens welcomed travelers, poets, and families alike. Children played beside canals. Old men discussed philosophy beneath willows. Merchants rested in shaded courtyards, sipping sherbet from brass cups. These were gardens of equality, where rich and poor shared the same breeze, the same sunlight, the same peace. The rulers who built them believed that beauty was a form of governance, that a content people were guided as much by harmony as by law. And so, fountains became public gifts. Water flowed freely, birds nested in the branches, and the city, in its green heart, remembered mercy. When night fell, the garden did not sleep. Lanterns flickered along the walkways, casting reflections on the still pools. The scent of roses deepened, mingling with cool air. The scholar stepped out once more, his lamp trembling slightly in the breeze. He looked upward, to the same stars that guided sailors and poets. The water mirrored them, so that heaven seemed to descend and rest upon the earth. In that reflection lay the heart of the Islamic garden, not a display of power, but a prayer in form, a wish to bring the eternal into reach, if only for a moment. Even the most carefully tended garden yields to time. Leaves fall, water lines crack, the air grows still. Yet those who built them understood impermanence. They embraced it, for beauty was never meant to last. It was meant to remind. Each season carried its own verse, spring's fragrance of renewal, summer's hum of life, autumn's golden resignation, winter's silence of rest. In the turning of the seasons, the people of the Golden Age saw reflection of life itself, growth, fullness, fading, and return. And so each garden became not a monument, but a meditation. Centuries later, the gardens of the Golden Age still whisper through time. Their fountains may be dry, their walls broken, but their essence remains. In every courtyard, every shaded street, every act of gentleness toward nature. The idea they carried was simple yet eternal, that beauty and balance are forms of worship, that tending to the earth is a way of tending to the soul, that paradise is not found, it is made, moment by moment, gesture by gesture, drop by drop. And if one listens closely, even now, one can hear it, the faint sound of water moving endlessly through the memory of civilization. The people of the Golden Age built gardens not only of soil, but of meaning. They saw no division between nature and knowledge, art and devotion, life and the divine. Their gardens were sanctuaries of thought, reflections of what the world could be when harmony replaced haste. Each fountain, each leaf, each shaft of light told the same truth, that paradise begins not in heaven, but in the care we give to the living earth. As the night closes and the water stills, one truth endures like fragrance after rain. To nurture a garden is to nurture the world, and in that act, every human being becomes, in some small way, a creator of paradise. Night descends upon Baghdad. The streets are nearly silent now. Only the call of a night watchman echoes softly across the Tigris. In a small courtyard beyond the markets, a single window glows with a trembling light. Inside, a scholar sits at his desk, a lamp of olive oil burning beside him, its flame mirrored in the brass inkpot. The air smells faintly of parchment, cedar, and warm smoke. Outside, the city sleeps, but within this room, the world awakens. The scholar bends low over his manuscript, tracing with calm fingers the letters of a verse that came from far across time and sand. He works slowly, carefully, not for fame, not for wealth, but for something older, quieter, and more enduring, the pursuit of understanding. To seek knowledge in the age of the Abbasids was not merely an act of intellect, it was an act of faith. It was believed that the world itself was a book, written by the divine hand, waiting to be read by those who cared to look. In the madrasas and libraries of the Golden Age, students gathered not to memorize, but to wonder. They debated the nature of stars, the movement of water, the balance between reason and revelation. Curiosity was not disobedience, it was reverence. For to ask a question was to admit that the world was greater than oneself, that truth was a horizon always receding, never fully reached. The pursuit of knowledge became a form of worship, and in this pursuit, the lamp became a symbol, fragile, flickering, yet persistent against the darkness of ignorance. At the heart of Baghdad stood Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom. More than a library, it was a constellation of minds. Here, languages met: Greek, Persian, Sanskrit, Syriac, and Arabic, mingling like rivers into a single sea. The translators sat at long tables, their tools simple: reed pens, parchment, patience. They translated Aristotle beside works of Indian mathematics, Galen beside Persian astronomy. They argued gently over words that had no equivalents, over meanings that had to be felt rather than said. The House of Wisdom was lit not just by lamps, but by intention. Knowledge passed from hand to hand, from century to century, as if the world itself were rediscovering its own reflection. It was said that when the scholars finished a translation, they would gather in the courtyard to recite poetry, verses about stars, about love, about the endlessness of learning. For even logic, they believed, was a form of beauty. Knowledge in this age had weight, texture, and sound. The scratching of a pen on parchment, the measured dripping of an oil lamp, the faint rustle of silk robes as a student rose to speak. Astrolabes gleamed in the hands of astronomers, their brass surfaces etched with constellations and circles of time. Mathematicians drew patterns in sand, geometry as poetry, proof as prayer. Physicians dissected not for power, but for compassion, to relieve suffering, to understand the perfection of creation. They copied ancient texts and added their own commentaries, merging observation with faith. Each scholar saw his work as a bridge between heaven and earth, between what is known and what is yet to be understood. The universe was a vast equation, and the mind was its quiet instrument. In the madrasas of Damascus, Cairo, Nishapur, and Baghdad, the bond between teacher and student was sacred. Learning was not a transaction, it was a transmission. The teacher did not lecture, he guided. He spoke in slow, deliberate tones, allowing silence to carry meaning where words could not. The students listened, not to memorize, but to absorb, as the soil absorbs rain. Between them, a lamp often burned. It symbolized the knowledge that passed from one heart to another. Light multiplied, never diminished. When lessons ended, they sat together in silence, sipping tea brewed with mint and rose. A few would ask questions softly. Others would write by lamplight until dawn. The scholar's path was not one of speed, but of patience. For true knowledge, they believed, could not be rushed. It had to unfold as slowly and gently as the morning light. Some scholars taught not in halls, but in gardens. Beneath fig and palm trees, they discussed logic and ethics, the movements of the soul and the stars. Among them were philosophers like Al-Farabi, Ibn Sina, and Al-Kindi, men who saw no boundary between reason and faith. For them, knowledge was not confined to one language, one religion, or one culture. It was a universal inheritance, the light of truth reflected through many lenses. They wrote of balance between body and mind, between matter and spirit. They debated with gentleness, seeking not victory, but understanding. And in the soft hours of afternoon, when sunlight filtered through leaves, one could hear their voices blending with the sound of water, thought itself becoming a kind of music. In the pursuit of knowledge, the calligrapher held a sacred role, for he gave shape to thought and beauty to truth. Each stroke was prayerful. The reed pen, cut at an angle, became an instrument of devotion. The letters flowed like water, steady, deliberate, alive. In his quiet chamber, the calligrapher worked for hours, tracing verses from the Quran, or copying treatises on medicine, astronomy, or philosophy. He believed that words carried not only meaning, but blessing. To write was to preserve was to honor, and to honor was to serve, not oneself, but the generations yet to come. The translation movement of the Golden Age was one of humanity's quiet miracles. Men and women of diverse faiths, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Zoroastrian, worked side by side, guided by curiosity rather than creed. They gathered in small rooms filled with scrolls and manuscripts from Alexandria, Athens, and Persia. They debated each word, translating not only language but thought. What did the Greeks mean by soul? What did the Indians mean by zero? Between every translation lay an act of humility, the recognition that truth belongs to no one, yet speaks to all. Their work preserved the wisdom of centuries and seeded the Renaissance that would one day follow. But they did not think of legacy. They thought only of accuracy, clarity, and reverence for the mind that came before. In many cities of the Golden Age, women too held lamps of learning. Some taught poetry, others practiced medicine or mathematics. In Damascus, Fatima al-Fihri founded a university that still stands, Al-Qarawiyyin. Her dream was simple, that the gates of knowledge remain open to all who seek it. Women copied manuscripts, tutored young scholars, debated theology behind latticed windows. Their names were not always recorded, but their light remains, woven through the history of ideas. To study was to honor creation. To teach was to pass the flame forward. And so, the pursuit of knowledge became a shared inheritance, transcending gender, class, and time. In the deep hours of night, when the city fell silent, scholars remained awake. Their lamps flickered, their eyes red from reading, their hearts steady. Some studied astronomy, mapping stars that had guided caravans for centuries. Others copied texts by hand, their ink drying slowly under the oil flame. Sometimes they paused, listening to the night wind move through the lattice screens, whispering like the breath of the desert. They knew that no discovery was theirs alone. Knowledge was a river. Each generation added its tributaries, but the current flowed from eternity. And so they worked in quiet devotion, content not to be known, but to know. In the heart of their thought lay a simple truth. Light was not merely physical. It was the essence of understanding itself. From the writings of Al-Ghazali to Ibn Sina's metaphysics, the metaphor of illumination guided philosophy and science alike. To know was to be illuminated, to awaken to the divine logic of creation. The scholar's lamp thus became both symbol and tool, a fragile flame that burned only through care, discipline, and humility. Light, they believed, was not owned, it was shared. Just as a flame lights another without losing itself, so too does knowledge multiply through generosity. Centuries pass, empires fade, libraries crumble, but the light remains. Every time a book is opened, a star is rekindled from that ancient sky. Every time a student learns, a small echo of Baghdad, Cordoba, and Cairo stirs again. The scholars of the Golden Age did not seek immortality, yet they achieved it, not through conquest or wealth, but through thought, through the slow, steady act of learning and sharing. Their flame lives in the pages of modern science, in the rhythm of mathematics, in the ethics of inquiry, in the libraries of every nation that values reason and wonder alike. And so, their lamps still burn, unseen, but unextinguished. As the night fades, the scholar finally lifts his eyes from the page. The lamp has burned low. Outside, dawn begins, a pale gold spreading across the horizon. He closes his manuscript, blows gently on the flame, and for a moment, the world is still. The air smells of ink and olive oil, of effort and grace. In that silence, he smiles, knowing that what he learned will outlive him, as light outlives its lamp. For in the end, the pursuit of knowledge is not about discovery, but devotion. Not about reaching an answer, but walking the endless path with humility, one illuminated step at a time. In the early morning, before the city stirs, a mason kneels before a wall of pale stone. His chisel rests against the surface, his breath slow, his eyes steady. Around him, the half-built dome of a mosque rises toward the dawn, its unfinished arch open to the first light of day. He strikes once. The sound echoes softly, like a heartbeat within the bones of the earth. Dust drifts through the air, illuminated by sunlight. To him, this is not labor. It is remembrance, the continuation of a pattern begun long before his birth, one that will outlive him. In this age, art and faith were not divided. To carve, to build, to measure, these were forms of prayer. Every line held meaning, every pattern an echo of eternity. And as his chisel touches stone, the mason whispers under his breath, "Only what is built with patience endures." The builders of the Golden Age did not see geometry as an abstraction. They saw it as divine order made visible. In every curve of an arch, in every tile of a mosaic, they read the harmony of creation. Mathematics was not cold logic, it was music, silent but exact. To draw a circle was to imitate the movement of the heavens. To draw a square was to represent the balance of the earth. And to bring them together was to honor the unity of both, the eternal and the transient. In their workshops, artisans used compasses and cords to trace patterns that repeated without end, shapes that suggested infinity, yet obeyed perfect proportion. To them, symmetry was not ornament, it was remembrance. Each pattern whispered the same truth, that the universe is governed not by chaos, but by grace. When the architects of Isfahan or Samarra spoke of building, they did not speak of walls, they spoke of light. Their art was the choreography of illumination. They studied how sunlight entered a space, how it changed with hour and season, how it could be softened, reflected, multiplied. Domes became instruments of radiance, their interiors painted in blues and golds that caught and scattered every beam. Windows were carved with lattice screens of stone or wood, turning light into patterns that moved across floors like flowing water. At dawn, the mosques glowed pale gold. At noon, they shimmered white. At dusk, the light deepened to amber, as though the walls themselves remembered the sun. To step inside was to step into a universe designed not for grandeur, but for wonder. For in that filtered glow one felt the world slow, and the soul align with something immeasurable. In a workshop near Nishapur, a potter stirs glaze in a shallow bowl. It is the color of the sky before dawn, pale blue, almost translucent. Beside him, hundreds of small tiles dry in the sun, their surfaces waiting to receive a pattern. When fired, they will adorn a mosque, a palace, or perhaps the humble courtyard of a scholar's home. Each tile, by itself, is simple, but placed together, they form a mosaic of infinite repetition, a vision of order so perfect that it feels eternal. The craftsmen who made these tiles often worked for years without signing their names. They sought not recognition, but precision, that elusive balance between beauty and truth. They believed that color could speak a language of its own, the turquoise of water, the cobalt of knowledge, the white of purity. Each hue, each line, each reflection of light upon glaze was a prayer translated into art. The architects of the Golden Age built not only for the eye, but for the ear. They understood how sound could be shaped as carefully as stone. In great mosques, domes were designed so that a whisper beneath them echoed like a chorus. Walls curved gently inward, allowing the human voice to travel without strain. Every recitation of prayer rising, multiplying, returning as if the building itself breathed. Silence was part of the design. The pauses between echoes carried meaning as deep as the words themselves. Architecture, they believed, was not merely a structure, it was a vessel for presence. And so, their buildings invited stillness as much as sound, reflection as much as ritual. Even empty, their halls seemed alive, resonant with the memory of devotion. In the heart of the city, behind a small wooden door, another kind of craftsman worked. The clockmaker. His world was not of stone and light, but of time itself. Surrounded by brass gears, polished spheres, and delicate chains, he sought to capture what could not be seen, the passing of hours. The Golden Age saw the birth of remarkable devices. Water clocks that dripped with measured rhythm, astrolabes that tracked the heavens, automata that moved with silent precision. Each mechanism was both art and philosophy, a reflection of cosmic order in miniature form. To the clockmaker, each gear was a planet, each pendulum a prayer. He worked in patience, for perfection required silence. And when at last the clock began to move, water flowing, levers shifting, bells chiming, he smiled not with pride, but with awe. He had, for a moment, imitated the motion of the stars. In Cairo, Damascus, and Samarkand, towers and domes rose not as symbols of power, but as meditations in form. Each minaret, each courtyard, was drawn from a single principle: balance. The builder's art lay in proportion, the curve of an arch mirroring the horizon, the rhythm of columns echoing the pulse of time. Nothing was random. Every detail belonged to a greater whole. At noon, the architecture offered shade, cool, geometric, deliberate. At sunset, the same structures became canvases for color, their shadows long and tender. The builders measured time by these shadows. They watched how they moved across stone, marking the hours with precision more ancient than any clock. To live among these buildings was to live within a geometry of mercy, a world where even shadow was part of beauty. Far from the cities, in villages and desert caravans, women sat before looms, weaving patterns of astonishing intricacy. Their hands moved with unspoken rhythm, thread over thread, color upon color. These weavers were storytellers without words. Each rug, each textile, carried symbols of tribe, memory, and faith. Triangles for protection, circles for unity, interlaced lines for life's endless journey. To an outsider, they might seem mere decoration, but to the weaver, they were maps of the unseen, spiritual geographies written in wool and dye. When finished, the rugs were sold in the markets of Baghdad or hung in the quiet rooms of scholars. Yet their true purpose was never to impress. It was to remind that even in the simplest act of creation, there lies the pattern of eternity. Among the masons, carpenters, and metalworkers, there existed a quiet brotherhood, a fellowship bound not by wealth, but by craft. They gathered after sunset in courtyards lit by lanterns. They shared bread, tea, and stories of projects completed and dreams yet drawn. They discussed proportions, the strength of domes, the mysteries of measurement. Many could not read, yet they knew mathematics through their hands. They understood the language of curves, the discipline of balance, the patience of creation. They taught one another freely, for they believed that skill was a trust, not to be hoarded, but to be shared. Through their collaboration, entire cities became testaments to collective genius, anonymous, harmonious, enduring. Among all forms, the arch held special meaning. It was both passage and protection, a threshold between the visible and the invisible. To build one required precision. A single miscut stone could collapse the whole, and yet, when completed, it seemed effortless, a curve that defied gravity through grace alone. The builders saw in it a metaphor for faith, that strength lies not in resistance, but in harmony, that balance is the foundation of endurance. Through arches, domes, and vaults, they learned to translate the eternal into form, to give shape to what cannot be seen, only felt. Precision was their poetry. Whether carving marble or forging metal, Each craftsman worked with the same quiet devotion. A single mistake meant beginning again, not as punishment, but as practice in humility. For perfection, they believed, belonged to God alone. The artisan's duty was only to approach it, slowly, carefully, endlessly. Even imperfection was honored. A tile might be deliberately flawed, a pattern subtly broken, a reminder that human hands cannot match divine symmetry. And yet, through those imperfections, beauty deepened. For in their restraint lay reverence, and in their patience lay grace. What the builders of the Golden Age created was not merely physical, it was spiritual architecture. Their mosques, courtyards, and fountains shaped how people moved, prayed, and breathed. They designed with the heart in mind, every doorway an invitation to humility, every dome a reminder of infinity. Even the smallest detail, a window or tile, was meant to align the human spirit with the rhythm of the cosmos. To live among such art was to be gently reminded each day that beauty and discipline are not separate paths. They are the same journey, walked in different light. And in that harmony, life itself became a kind of architecture, a structure built slowly, lovingly, toward balance. Centuries have passed. The masons' names are lost, their tools buried in dust. But their creations remain. Domes rising like captured sky, arches whispering with light. They built not for glory, but for truth. Not for power, but for beauty that could teach patience. Every stone they placed was a word in a silent prayer, a reminder that the divine is not distant, but present in proportion, in craft, in care. And as the sun sets over the blue domes of Samarkand, their work still speaks, not in sound, but in stillness. It tells us what we shape shapes us in return, and what is built with love endures beyond time itself. Night descends over Baghdad. The heat of the day softens into a whisper of wind. In a courtyard lined with jasmine and marble, a group of scholars gathers beneath lanterns. There is no formality here, only quiet companionship. A jug of cool water, a plate of figs, and the sound of distant strings from a neighbor's lute. Someone begins to recite, a verse of poetry, soft and measured. The words linger in the air, like incense rising. When the last syllable fades, silence follows, not empty, but full of shared understanding. In this world, words were not merely spoken, they were lived. They were the music of the soul, a way to measure time, emotion, and thought. These courtyards under open sky became sanctuaries of conversation. Here, poetry was prayer, music was reflection, and speech itself was an art form, delicate as the fragrance of night-blooming flowers. In the cities of the Golden Age, poetry was more than entertainment. It was the highest form of thought. Every scholar, every courtier, every student learned the rhythm of words before the rhythm of logic. To speak well was to live well. A verse could console a grieving heart or settle a debate more deeply than any argument. Poetry was the architecture of the inner world, a structure built not from stone, but from rhythm and silence. When a poet described the dawn, he was not describing light alone. He was speaking of rebirth, of patience, of divine mercy in the turning of a single day. They saw language as sacred material, to be shaped with care, humility, and music. And so, even the simplest poem might carry the weight of philosophy. In the heart of Shiraz, a garden blooms, the scent of roses mingling with the sound of water. Here, poets walked among the trees, seeking inspiration in shade and silence. They believed that beauty spoke to the soul in two voices, one seen, one heard. A flower could be as eloquent as a verse. A breeze could complete a poem that words could not finish. The poets of the Golden Age, Rumi, Al-Mutanabi, Hafez, each carried within them the same conviction, that poetry was not written for kings, but for the human heart. They wrote of love and absence, of knowledge and longing, of the eternal within the everyday. And they did so not to escape life, but to deepen it. In their verses, even sorrow became a kind of praise, for they understood that pain, too, is a form of connection, a reminder of the distance between the soul and its source. Poetry was not confined to palaces or manuscripts. It lived in schools, in libraries, in the hearts of children who recited verses by memory. In the madrasa courtyards, teachers sat cross-legged on carpets, surrounded by students holding wooden tablets. Between lessons of law or astronomy, a verse of Rumi or a couplet from al-Buturi would be recited to illustrate a point. For they believed that poetry sharpened thought. It trained the tongue to precision and the mind to grace. A scholar might know the movements of the stars, yet he was incomplete without rhythm in his speech. Knowledge was not only to be understood, it was to be felt. In this way, learning became an art of balance between intellect and emotion, reason and melody. And in every courtyard where a poem was spoken, the boundaries between science and song grew thin. Music, too, was seen as another language of the soul, one without words, yet filled with meaning. In the homes of scholars and the halls of courts, musicians played softly, not to excite, but to soothe. The oud, the ney, the kanun, each carried its own temperament. The oud spoke of memory, warm and low. The ney wept gently, like wind over reeds. The kanun shimmered like light over water. Musicians studied for years to master not only technique, but stillness, for the pauses between notes were as sacred as the sound itself. To listen was to enter a kind of meditation. Time slowed, thought dissolved, and only the music remained, flowing like water through the listener's heart. The reed flute, the ney, held a special place in this culture of sound. It was said to speak the language of longing, the ache of separation between the soul and its source. Poets wrote of the flute as a lover, torn from its reed bed, forever mourning the loss of union. Its cry was not mere melody, it was memory itself. In Sufi gatherings, the ney's song accompanied recitations of divine love. Dervishes turned slowly, robes flowing like petals, as the sound spiraled upward, a prayer made audible. Those who listened often wept, though they could not explain why, for in that fragile note they felt both joy and sorrow, the twin truths of being alive. Not all gatherings were solemn. In many cities, poets and philosophers met in tea houses or small taverns, places of conversation, laughter, and debate. There, beneath hanging lamps and smoke from perfumed wood, words flowed like wine. A poet would recite a verse. A scholar would respond with another. Each reply a reflection, a challenge, or a playful twist of meaning. They drank little, but spoke deeply, intoxicated not by drink, but by thought. They called these nights the feasts of the tongue. And as the night grew long and lanterns burned low, someone would quote an old verse. What is speech, if not the music of thought made visible? In royal courts, poetry held power of another kind. A single verse could alter a ruler's heart, soften pride, inspire mercy, or remind him of humility. Kings sought poets not for flattery, but for truth spoken beautifully. For in an age that revered wisdom, the poet was both artist and conscience. One story tells of a caliph who, after hearing a simple verse about the brevity of life, removed his crown and sat in silence for hours. He later said, "A poet can do what 1,000 sermons cannot." Thus, the poet's gift was not command, but reflection, to turn the hearts of the mighty toward gentleness. The beauty of words did not end with sound. It continued in the curve of the pen, in the flowing elegance of calligraphy. The calligrapher was a musician of ink. His rhythm lay in movement, his melody in line. Each letter danced across parchment like a note upon a staff. He worked in silence, yet his art was full of sound. For the eye, too, could hear, in the balance, the pause, the deliberate breath before each stroke. The calligrapher's script was not only beautiful, it was a discipline of soul. To write the name of God required stillness within. To draw a perfect curve required the same patience as prayer. Poetry, music, and calligraphy all were reflections of one truth, that rhythm lies at the heart of existence. The planets moved in rhythm, the heart beat in rhythm, even silence carried rhythm. To understand this was to live in harmony with the cosmos itself. A poet might say, "Every leaf that trembles, every ripple on the pond, every sigh of wind, all sing the same song, only in different tongues." The people of that age listened to the world as though it were an instrument. They did not seek to conquer nature, but to join its music. And through that harmony, life acquired meaning, a rhythm that bound the seen and unseen together. All beauty depends on silence. It is the space that gives shape to sound, the pause that allows meaning to breathe. The poets of the Golden Age knew this. They wrote as much for the empty space between verses as for the lines themselves. A wise teacher once said, "Speech is silver, but silence is the breath of the divine." In that silence, between note and note, word and word, the listener found peace. Not the peace of absence, but of presence, the kind that fills the heart when it ceases to reach. At the end of the night, when the lanterns are nearly out and dawn begins to pale the sky, the courtyard grows quiet. The poets have gone, the musicians sleep. Only the fountain continues to sing, its rhythm unchanged. The first birds begin to stir. Their song is simple, but it holds the same truth the poets spent lifetimes seeking. A servant sweeps fallen petals from the marble floor. He does not know the verses spoken here, nor the names of those who gathered. Yet the air itself feels wiser, as though the courtyard remembers. And so ends another night in the age of conversation, an age when words were sacred, music was prayer, and silence itself was part of speech. Centuries have passed, yet the music remains, It hums in libraries, in mosques, in the quiet rhythm of pens and breaths. It speaks not through instruments, but through patience, through the beauty of measured thought and gentle sound. The poets of that age believed that every heart carries its own melody, and that wisdom is nothing more than learning to listen. Perhaps that is what the Golden Age truly gave the world. Not wealth nor conquest, but rhythm. A rhythm that still whispers across centuries to all who listen in silence. Night descends upon the open desert. The horizon glows faintly, touched by the last light of sunset. One by one, the stars begin to appear, steady, ancient, and familiar. A caravan rests beside a small oasis. Camels kneel silently, their silhouettes outlined by firelight. Men gather in a circle, drinking tea, speaking softly. They speak of cities unseen, of Samarkand, of Fez, of Cairo, names that sound like promises carried by the wind. One man lifts his gaze to the stars. His voice is calm, reverent. "These are the maps of heaven," he says, "and we walk beneath them to find our way upon the earth." For in the Golden Age, travel was more than trade. It was knowledge in motion, a way to measure the world not in miles, but in wonder. Curiosity was the heartbeat of this age. To learn was to wander, outward through lands, inward through thought. From Andalusia to the Indus, scholars, merchants, and mystics followed the same instinct, to ask, what lies beyond? Some sought new trade routes. Others sought rare manuscripts, medicinal herbs, or glimpses of forgotten civilizations. Each journey, whether by ship or on foot, was a pilgrimage toward understanding. They believed that the world itself was a book, and that every step turned a page. To travel, then, was not escape, but reading. And as they read the world, they found in its diversity the proof of unity. 1,000 different languages, yet all whispering of the same truth. Across continents, invisible roads stitched the world together. From the markets of Baghdad to the docks of Basra, from Damascus to Samarkand, caravans carried more than goods. They carried stories, music, books, and ideas. The Silk Road was not one path, but a river of movement. Caravans flowing like water through mountains, plains, and sand. Merchants shared knowledge of spices and stars. Sailors learned the winds of the Indian Ocean. Nomads guided travelers across the dunes by reading the sky like scripture. Along these roads, mosques rose beside wells, inns offered rest to weary minds, and strangers became friends over tea. Every journey left behind a thread, and together those threads wove the first fabric of globalization. In the libraries of the Golden Age, maps were not only tools of navigation, they were mirrors of imagination. Scholars such as Al-Idrisi and Ibn Hakal charted the known world with astonishing precision. Their maps shimmered with artistry, coastlines drawn like calligraphy, mountains shaded like poetry. Yet what made these maps beautiful was not accuracy alone. It was the humility they held. For every unknown region, they wrote not, "Here be monsters," but simply, "And beyond this, God knows best." They understood that mapping was an act of reverence. To trace creation while acknowledging mystery. In their hands, geography became philosophy. Every line a question, every compass point a prayer. Beneath the vault of the heavens, astronomers lifted polished brass astrolabes, instruments of both science and wonder. With them, they measured the position of stars, the tilt of the earth, and the passage of time. Sailors used them to navigate seas. Scholars used them to determine the hour of prayer. But for many, the astrolabe was more than a device. It was a symbol, a reminder that the same patterns guiding the stars guided the heart. They believed that knowledge of the heavens brought humility, not arrogance. For to chart the cosmos was to glimpse the architecture of divine thought. And so, beneath starlit skies, the astronomer's silence became a kind of worship. While deserts connected the east and west, the oceans carried the same dream upon waves. Arab sailors, using stars and monsoon winds, mapped the coasts of Africa, India, and China long before modern charts were born. They memorized the music of wind, how it shifted in summer and retreated in winter, how it whispered of coming storms. Their ships, sewn with coconut fiber, glided across the sea like quiet prayers. Each voyage was an act of trust in craft, in crew, in God. From Zanzibar to Guangzhou, ports shimmered with new sounds and scents. Pepper and silk, pearls and ink, laughter and learning. In the meeting of currents and cultures, a new kind of map emerged, not of land, but of connection. Every traveler carried something more precious than goods, a notebook. Within its pages were sketches of cities, lists of herbs, notes on local customs, prayers, and verses. The greatest among these travelers, Ibn Battuta, crossed more than 70,000 miles, writing not of conquest, but of curiosity. He described the people of Mali, the mosques of Delhi, the markets of Cairo, the serenity of the Maldives. His pen moved like a compass, guided not by ambition, but by awe. For him, and for many others, writing was another form of travel, a journey inward through memory. In their pages we glimpse not only the world they saw, but the wonder with which they saw it. Along the great trade routes stood caravanserais, vast inns where travelers rested between journeys. They were more than shelters, they were crossroads of minds. Within their courtyards, languages blended. Greek met Persian, Arabic met Sanskrit. Ideas met and transformed. A physician from Bukhara might share remedies with a monk from India. A mathematician might debate a philosopher until dawn. In these meetings, knowledge grew like a tree, fed by many roots. For this reason, historians often say the Golden Age was not the creation of one people, but the symphony of many. The compass, that small circle of metal and magnet, changed the way humans moved through the world. But long before compasses were common, travelers of the Golden Age navigated by memory and devotion. They found direction in prayer, for to face Mecca was to face purpose. This union of science and spirituality gave travel its depth. Journeys were not measured only by distance, but by reflection. A man might cross oceans, yet remain lost. Another might walk a single mile and find the truth. And so, for these travelers, every road, however long, ultimately led inward. Trade was not merely an exchange of goods, it was an exchange of worlds. From one caravan to another passed not only silk and gold, but words and wisdom. A merchant might carry a jar of honey from Yemen and return with a book of philosophy from Greece. A craftsman might sell his pottery in Cairo and bring home a new song from Persia. Through these gentle movements, cultures intertwined, not through conquest, but through curiosity. It was a quiet revolution, one built on hospitality, generosity, and conversation. The desert, vast and unforgiving, taught lessons no book could hold. Those who crossed it learned patience from silence, humility from distance, and endurance from the sun. They discovered that true wealth is not what one carries, but what one remembers. At night, the desert transformed. Its heat replaced by cool wind, its emptiness filled with stars. To rest beneath that sky was to feel the pulse of eternity, a reminder that knowledge, like the horizon, has no end. Every journey, however long, ends in return. When travelers came back to their homes, to the narrow streets, the call to prayer, the smell of bread from familiar ovens, they brought more than stories. They brought perspective, the knowledge that the world, in all its difference, shares one heart. They spoke softly of what they had seen, not as masters, but as witnesses. And in their words, others found courage to wonder. Thus the cycle continued, one generation traveling, another dreaming, both moving toward the same horizon of understanding. The maps of the Golden Age have faded. Their ink has thinned, their parchment grown brittle. But the spirit that drew them, that ancient curiosity, still endures. For the world remains a vast manuscript, still waiting to be read. Every star, every wave, every path through the sand invites the same question. Where does this lead? Perhaps the answer is not in the destination, but in the motion itself. To walk, to learn, to listen. These are the true journeys. And somewhere beneath the eternal sky, the caravans of thought still move, quietly, endlessly, toward the horizon of knowledge. Evening falls upon the city of Baghdad. The air is still, heavy with dust and memory. Once the Tigris reflected the glow of lanterns that lined the libraries, the workshops, the schools. Now its surface shimmers faintly beneath a pale, forgotten moon. A lone scholar sits beside the river, his lamp flickering. He copies the last few lines of a manuscript, not knowing whether the world that once honored these words will remember them tomorrow. The ink glides across the parchment. Outside, the wind moves softly through the arches of abandoned schools. In the silence, you can almost hear the echo of the past, the laughter of students, the murmurs of teachers, the hum of life that once filled these walls. The age of brilliance has not vanished. It has simply folded itself into the fabric of time, like the scent of incense lingering long after the flame has died. Every golden age carries within it the seed of silence, not as punishment, but as rest, the stillness after great creation. The scholars of Baghdad, Cordoba, and Damascus once filled their nights with debate and discovery. Now, the same libraries stand with their doors half open, dust gathering on tables where once ink flowed like rivers. Some say the Mongols brought the end, that the fires of invasion turned knowledge to ash. And it is true. The waters of the Tigris once ran black with the ink of drowned books. But decline rarely comes in a single night. It arrives softly, like sleep. One generation choosing comfort over curiosity. One ruler silencing the poet. One scholar leaving his post because there is no one left to teach. The silence that follows is not cruel. It is the earth taking a breath, the mind pausing before it dreams again. Not all lamps went out. Some, like hidden stars, continued to burn in small corners of the world. In Fez, in Cairo, in Isfahan, scribes copied manuscripts by hand, preserving what they could. Every page saved was an act of faith, a whisper into the ear of the future. In Andalusia, the legacy found refuge. The scholars of Al-Andalus passed their knowledge to Europe. Their translations became the seeds of the Renaissance. Mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy. Each discipline carried the fingerprints of those who had lived centuries before. And though their names were often forgotten or mispronounced, their ideas endured. A quiet flame traveling through time. Knowledge, after all, is like light. It does not belong to one hand, nor one nation, but moves freely, finding new hearts to illuminate. Centuries later, travelers began to return to the lands once filled with learning. They walked through the ruins of observatories, stood beneath cracked domes that once measured the stars, and felt a strange ache, as if they had arrived too late for a beautiful conversation. But in the wind that passed through those ruins, they heard something, not words, but a rhythm, a pulse of thought that had never truly ceased. The Golden Age, they realized, had not been destroyed. It had been absorbed, woven into the languages, sciences, and philosophies of the world. Its echo could be found in the instruments of astronomers, in the verses of poets, in the geometry of cathedrals and mosques alike. To remember it was not merely nostalgia. It was to recognize that humanity at its best has always shared its light. There are words in old Arabic manuscripts that have no direct translation today. They describe subtle shades of beauty, knowledge, and emotion, meanings that shimmer between intellect and spirit. These words are relics of a time when language itself was a form of art, when to write was to breathe, when to name something was to honor its existence. Among them are terms for the love of learning, for the yearning that drives one to seek, not for gain, but for grace. To lose such words is to lose a way of seeing the world, but to rediscover them, even in a whisper, is to relight the lamp of memory. And so, the work continues. Historians, translators, dreamers, each one brushing dust from forgotten syllables, reviving the beauty that once guided minds through the dark. Ideas are the most patient travelers. They cross borders long after empires fall. The medical texts of Al-Razi guided doctors in Italy. The mathematics of Al-Khwarizmi shaped modern algebra. The optics of Ibn al-Haytham inspired the study of light itself. Each name a constellation, each thought a star, their light continuing long after their authors had vanished into dust. We rarely notice the lineage of our knowledge, yet we are surrounded by their echoes, in the words we use, the maps we follow, the architecture that shelters us, and the questions we still ask. The Golden Age may have dimmed, but its stars never stopped shining. They simply moved higher, where every curious heart might someday look up and find them. Empires fall, libraries burn, rivers dry. But memory has its own laws. It hides in stories told by grandparents, in verses recited under moonlight, in the geometry of tiles that still adorn old walls. Even when cities crumble, their patterns remain, reminding us that beauty is never truly lost. In Damascus, a craftsman carving wood follows a design centuries old. In Morocco, a poet still begins his verse with Bismillah. In every prayer, in every pattern, there lies an inheritance of grace. The fall was never the end. It was simply the earth's way of reminding us that no civilization owns the light. We only borrow it for a while. There are places still untouched, rooms sealed for centuries, their doors hidden behind collapsed walls. Within them rest the dreams of a civilization, scrolls written in careful ink, maps of forgotten stars, letters from poets to patrons long gone. Sometimes a traveler or archaeologist uncovers one. The air inside smells of dust and jasmine, and for a moment, the past breathes again. The words awaken like seeds meeting rain, and the scholar who reads them feels the trembling of centuries. This is not resurrection, it is recognition, the realization that knowledge never truly dies. It only waits for someone to listen again. We live today surrounded by the inheritance of that age, from the architecture that shelters us, to the instruments of science, to the ethics of inquiry. All of it traces back quietly to those who first believed that learning was a sacred act. They taught that light, once shared, multiplies, that to teach is to worship, to seek is to serve. Their message crosses time. We are not owners of wisdom, but its caretakers. And if the lamps of memory seem dim, it is because we have forgotten to tend them. Yet all it takes is a single spark, a question, a book, a teacher, a listener in the dark, to begin the age of light anew. Walk through a modern city, past the hum of electricity, the pulse of neon, the towers of glass, and somewhere beneath the noise, you will feel it, the faint, steady echo of a civilization that once dreamed in gold and ink. Every hospital, every observatory, every university carries traces of their thought. The lamps may have changed form, but their flame remains the same. It lives in every question that begins with why, in every gaze turned toward the stars, in every child who reads by the light of curiosity. We are their legacy, not in name or nation, but in wonder. At last, dawn breaks again. The scholar by the river closes his book. The lamp beside him flickers one final time, then steadies, its light soft, eternal. He smiles, for he knows that the flame he tended is not his alone. It will pass from hand to hand, mind to mind, generation to generation. And though empires fall and ages turn, the light remains, sometimes hidden, sometimes forgotten, but always alive. For the pursuit of knowledge is not bound to a time or place. It is the oldest prayer, the first and final act of hope. And somewhere, even now, in a quiet room, a child opens a book, and a new golden age begins. The story of the golden age does not end with decline. It continues, softly, invisibly, in every corner of human curiosity. The true measure of a civilization is not how it falls, but how it is remembered. And so, as the lamps of memory burn through the centuries, they remind us of a single truth, that knowledge, once born, never truly dies. It waits, quietly, for the next soul brave enough to seek it. And so, the lamps have dimmed, the pages have closed. The night settles softly over the ancient cities of memory. Baghdad, Cordoba, Samarkand. Names that once shimmered like constellations now rest in silence beneath the slow turning of time. But silence is not absence. It is simply the space between heartbeats, the pause before the next breath of wonder. For history never ends, it only changes its voice. And tonight, if you listen closely, you can still hear it, a whisper traveling through the centuries, carried by wind, by ink, by starlight. Imagine a river flowing endlessly through time. It begins in the mountains of thought, gathering streams of curiosity, and carries them forward, through deserts, through cities, through minds. This river never dries. Even when the world seems to forget, its waters continue underground, quiet, hidden, alive. Each generation finds it anew. A child in Cairo tracing stars, a student in Andalusia reading an old book, a dreamer in Jakarta wondering how the world began. All of them, all of us, are drinking from the same stream. The story of the Golden Age was never just about empires or kings. It was about hands, hands that wrote, built, carved, and healed. The calligrapher's brush gliding across parchment, the astronomer polishing his astrolabe beneath starlight, the architect tracing the arc of a dome with devotion, the mother teaching her child to recite a verse. Each act, no matter how small, was a prayer in motion, a way to bring order and beauty to the world. And though those hands have long turned to dust, their touch remains upon everything we hold. Knowledge moves not only through books, but through breath, through stories told at night, through lessons whispered in courtyards, through songs carried by wind. One generation exhales, the next inhales, and so wisdom lives on, not as property, but as pulse. Even now, as we speak, the same rhythm continues. The murmur of questions, the quiet of reflection, the eternal heartbeat of wonder. Perhaps the truest legacy of the Golden Age is not what it built, but what it believed. That learning was sacred, that beauty was a reflection of truth, that curiosity was not rebellion but worship. To seek knowledge was to move closer to the divine, to touch, even for a moment, the mystery that holds all things together. And so the scholars, the poets, the dreamers, they did not chase power, they chased light. And in doing so, they lit a path for those who would come after, for you, for me, for anyone who still dares to ask why. At the heart of every civilization, there comes a moment of turning, when one chapter closes and another begins. The Golden Age was one such chapter. Its ending was gentle, like the slow closing of a beloved book. But the story within it, the story of thought, art, and compassion, did not end. It simply moved on to other hands, other voices, other ages. Every time you open a book, every time you look at the stars, you turn that same page once more. In every human being there lives a quiet echo, a longing to understand, to create,
to leave behind a trace of light. It is the same echo that called to the astronomers of Baghdad, to the poets of Persia, to the builders of Granada. It still calls to us now, in the silence between thoughts, in the stillness before sleep. The dream of the Golden Age was never about the past. It was about the future, the hope that knowledge might one day make us more gentle, more wise, more awake.
When we speak of the Golden Age, we are really speaking of ourselves, of what we were, what we are, and what we still might become. For the same light that guided their world flows quietly through ours. It burns in every act of kindness, in every pursuit of truth, in every humble question that begins with wonder. Time may divide the centuries, but the bridge between them is built of understanding. And as long as we continue to cross it, to remember, to learn, to share, the flame will never die. At last, all the cities fade, the scholars sleep, the markets fall silent. Only one light remains, the one inside you. It is small, perhaps, flickering, uncertain, but it is enough. It is the same light that guided travelers across deserts, the same glow that lit the house of wisdom, the same spark that turned ink into eternity. Guard it gently. Feed it with curiosity, with kindness, with thought. For when you do, you keep the Golden Age alive, not in history books, but in the quiet, luminous chambers of the soul. The night has grown still. The lamps have burned low. The story has reached its end, but its light continues beyond the screen, beyond the words, beyond the centuries. For knowledge is not a monument. It is a flame, one that must be tended, shared, and passed on. So sleep now, knowing that somewhere, in another time, in another heart, the flame still burns, softly, eternally, waiting for you to dream again.